That night, when I took the wallet my husband had forgotten at home to the airport, I thought I was just doing my duty as an attentive wife. Upon arriving at the terminal, right at midnight, the driver of the rideshare I had ordered suddenly locked all the doors. With a tense voice, he said, "Do not get out here, please. Trust me." I froze and asked, "Why, sir?" He was pale with fear and only muttered, "You will understand in 5 minutes." I remained silent, trying to take deep breaths and obeying his words, never imagining that exactly 5 minutes later, 3 police cruisers would surround us completely. I never would have thought that night would end up changing my entire life. Before we start with the story, I'm going to ask you for something very quick. Hit the like button on this video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments which city you are watching from. This way we can keep growing and bring you even more intense stories. The wall clock in the living room marked 12:15 at night. A cold, almost hostile silence reigned in the enormous house. Zaire had just finished tidying up the desk of her husband, Draymond, which had been left a disaster from the preparations for a supposedly improvised work trip. Draymond had said his goodbyes in a rush just an hour ago, claiming an urgent problem had arisen with the opening of a new branch of the company up north, and that he had to catch the first flight out in the early morning. Zaire, a devoted wife who rarely questioned anything, had only helped prepare his clothes and things without asking too many questions, because she trusted him blindly. During 3 years of marriage, Draymond had been the perfect husband to her. Hard-working, kind, and always sweet in his demeanor, he seemed like someone incapable of hurting her. When Zaire was about to turn off the office light, something black caught her attention under a pile of folders on the corner of the desk. She felt her heart drop when she recognized the object. It was Draymond's leather wallet. She picked it up immediately and checked inside. His ID, his main credit card, his debit card, and a thick wad of bills were all there. Zaire got nervous instantly. How was it possible that Draymond had left for the airport without his wallet? Without ID, he wouldn't be able to board the plane. Without cards or cash, he would have trouble during the trip. Immediately, images of him lost in the terminal, angry or even stranded because of that clumsiness, began to drill into her mind. Zaire ran to the bedroom to find her phone and called Draymond several times. The ringtone sounded over and over, but nobody answered. She thought perhaps he was in the car on the way to the airport, that he had his mobile on silent, or was talking to someone. That only increased her anxiety. She looked at the wall clock again. It was 12:20. Draymond's flight was scheduled for 2 in the morning. There was still time if she left immediately. They lived about 45 minutes from the airport if the traffic was clear. Zaire didn't drive at night because she suffered from glare blindness from oncoming headlights. And besides, the family chauffeur had gone home at sunset. Without thinking twice, she decided to order a rideshare through an app. With trembling fingers, she opened the app on her mobile. She had to take that wallet to him at all costs. She didn't want Draymond to get into trouble for something she could fix. After a few minutes of searching, the app indicated that a driver had accepted the trip. The name that appeared on the screen was Booker. The car was a black sedan, and it was very close to their gated community. He would arrive in about 5 minutes. Zaire quickly put on her hijab. She buttoned up a thick coat to protect herself from the freezing night air and clutched Draymond's wallet with such force that she seemed to be holding on to her own life. 5 minutes later, a black sedan pulled up in front of the gate. Zaire went out, locked up, and walked down to the street. She opened the back door of the car and settled into the seat. The air conditioning hit her face with an artificial cold that contrasted with the silence of the night. In the front seat sat a middle-aged black man with hair already graying at the temples. He looked at Zaire for barely a second through the rearview mirror. He had a sharp gaze, but an expressionless face. Zaire greeted him politely. She apologized for requesting a ride so late and explained that she had to go to the domestic departures terminal at the airport. Mr. Booker only nodded his head without turning around and started the car slowly, leaving the zone of luxury homes behind. A strange silence reigned inside the car. The radio wasn't playing, there was no light jazz, nor that small effort at conversation that many drivers make to break the ice. Only the sound of the engine and the friction of the tires on the asphalt could be heard. The sedan advanced along the almost empty highway, while the streetlights bathed the interior of the vehicle in a dim orange light. Zaire kept looking at her phone screen, hoping Draymond would return the call, but the screen remained black. She sent him a quick text to let him know she was on her way to the airport to bring him his wallet, but the message remained on delivered without a read receipt. She thought maybe his battery had died or that coverage was bad on the route to the airport. She tried to calm herself down, leaned her back against the seat, and tried to regulate her breathing. However, there was something in Booker's behavior that was starting to unsettle her. Zaire noticed that the driver was looking in the rearview mirror too frequently, checking both her movements and what was happening behind the car. Every few minutes, his eyes met hers in the reflection. That insistence made her feel uncomfortable. She adjusted her coat, hugged her purse where she had stored Draymond's wallet, and felt a pang of fear. Suddenly, all the news stories about crimes committed in rideshare cars she had read on social media came to mind. She was a woman alone, in the middle of the night, in a car with a stranger on a deserted highway. She tried to push those thoughts away, repeated prayers in silence, and told herself that surely Booker was just a serious, quiet, and tired man. To distract herself, Zaire turned toward the window. The tall buildings of downtown faded behind them, replaced by the darker open areas typical of the road leading to the airport. The car's speed was steady, neither too fast nor too slow. Booker drove with an almost exaggerated prudence, changing lanes over and over as if avoiding other vehicles, even though there was barely any traffic. An hour later, the intense lights of the airport began to glow in the distance. Zaire exhaled, relieved. She checked her phone. It was 1 o'clock exactly. There was still an hour left before Draymond's flight took off. She was convinced he would be at the check-in area, nervously looking for his wallet. She imagined his face of relief upon seeing her arrive with it, and smiled, feeling proud to be such an attentive wife. The car entered the airport zone. Booker seemed to be heading toward the usual departures area, where the lighting was bright, and there were always people coming and going. However, instead of stopping in front of the main lobby, he kept moving slowly until the very end of the passenger drop-off zone. That end was almost in darkness, with several streetlights burnt out, and it was much more solitary. Zaire frowned. She was about to ask the driver to stop at the central entrance, but her words froze when she saw Booker's expression in the mirror. The man's face was tense, beaded with cold sweat, as if he were holding his breath. The car stopped next to a large concrete column that separated the public zone from the VIP parking area. There was nobody outside, no sky caps, no other passengers, no visible security guards, only the darkness and the cutting wind of the early morning. Zaire felt goosebumps rise on her skin. Her instincts screamed that something was not right. She wanted to open the door as soon as the vehicle came to a full stop to run toward the illuminated interior of the terminal and find Draymond. She placed her hand on the handle and pulled, but the door didn't budge. She tried again with more force. Nothing. She tried to open the other side. The same. The doors were locked from the central control next to the driver's seat. A scorching panic invaded her chest. She began to gasp. She banged on the window to get the attention of anyone passing by, but the place remained deserted. Between sobs, she shouted at Booker, asking why he had locked the doors, demanding that he open them immediately. He didn't move. He gripped the steering wheel with such force that his knuckles had turned white. He didn't turn to look at her at any moment. His eyes were fixed on the dark sidewalk to the side of the car, as if he expected something terrible to emerge from there. Zaire broke down in pleas. She offered him money, jewelry, her purse, Draymond's wallet, anything as long as he let her go. It was then that Booker spoke with a deep voice, very serious and different from the beginning. "You are not getting out here, Zaire. I forbid it. Please believe me," he said, without taking his eyes off the exterior. Those words, instead of calming her, drove the terror even deeper. How could she trust a man who had her locked in a car in the middle of the night in front of an almost deserted airport? She broke down crying inconsolably and asked between sobs why he was doing this to her. Booker turned just a little. His features reflected genuine panic, but a steely determination shone in his eyes. He assured her that in 5 minutes she would understand everything, and that until then, her life depended on her not disobeying. Zaire's body began to tremble uncontrollably. She curled up in the back seat, hugging her purse, unable to decide if she should keep screaming or stay still to not provoke something worse. The seconds turned into eternities. Zaire fixed her gaze on the digital clock on the dashboard, watching as the minutes advanced in slow motion. 1, 2, 3. The silence inside the car was suffocating, while outside, the darkness seemed to hide a crouching predator. Booker kept watching the mirrors intently, as if monitoring an invisible enemy. When the counter changed to the 5th minute, the world shattered all at once. From the front and the back, 3 police cruisers appeared out of nowhere with sirens wailing and blue and red lights illuminating the forgotten corner of the terminal. They surrounded the sedan and blocked any exit. Zaire let out a stifled scream, convinced for a moment that they were coming to arrest the driver. She felt a glimmer of relief. She thought they had rescued her from a kidnapping. Several officers in bulletproof vests got out of the cars, armed with rifles. They moved with speed and military precision. Zaire ducked, fearing a shootout would erupt. She heard shouted orders over the loudspeakers, commanding someone to get down and surrender immediately. She closed her eyes and covered her ears, wishing for it all to end soon. But to her surprise, the police didn't aim at Booker's sedan. They passed right by, rounded the large concrete column next to the car, and pounced on a silhouette that was hidden in the darkness, exactly in the spot where the rear door would have been if Zaire had been able to get out. She dared to lift her head just a little. The officer subdued a man wrapped in a thick black coat with a cap pulled down to his eyebrows. The individual tried to struggle, but the numerical difference was overwhelming. They threw him to the ground and twisted his arms behind his back to handcuff him. From one of his pockets fell a folding knife and a handkerchief apparently soaked in liquid. An officer picked up the handkerchief with gloves and put it in an evidence bag. Even from the car, Zaire perceived a penetrating chemical smell that made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. Chloroform. At that moment, another officer opened the driver's door of the sedan from the outside and spoke to Booker through the window in a respectful tone, as if they knew each other from before. He informed him that the target had been detained and that the situation was under control. Booker nodded, finally letting out a sigh of relief, and deactivated the central lock. The click of the lock sounded like music of liberation to Zaire. Still trembling, Zaire asked what was happening and why they had caught that man. She didn't understand why the officers weren't arresting Booker, nor why they treated him with courtesy. The driver turned toward her calmly for the first time. His expression had changed. It was no longer that of a sullen stranger, but of someone looking at her with affection and respect. He introduced himself again, but this time not as a simple app driver. He told her his name was Booker, and that he had been the head of personal security for her late father, Mr. Langston. Zaire was left open-mouthed. She vaguely remembered that name from her childhood, the trusted man who had retired years ago. Booker explained that before dying, her father had secretly asked him to continue protecting her from afar because he had always feared someone would get close to her purely for financial interest. That very night, Booker had received intel that a plan to kidnap her had been set in motion. The man they had just arrested was a hitman hired to snatch her at the airport door. As soon as she set foot on the sidewalk, he would have immobilized her with that chloroform-soaked handkerchief and forced her into another vehicle. Zaire covered her mouth to suppress a scream. The idea that she had been seconds away from walking toward her own death left her frozen. Then, with a broken voice, she asked who could hate her enough to do something like that. Booker didn't answer with words. He raised his hand and pointed upward, to the second floor of the International Departures building, where the glass facade clearly revealed the illuminated interior. Zaire followed the direction of his finger and saw a very familiar figure. There was Draymond, her husband. He did not, however, have the face of a man distressed by the disappearance of his wife, but an expression reddened by rage and frustration. He threw his phone against the floor violently, and he wasn't alone. Beside him stood Kenyatta, Zaire's best friend, her inseparable companion in shopping trips and social gatherings. Kenyatta wore a flashy red dress and was tenderly holding Draymond's arm, trying to calm him. At their feet were two large suitcases, travel suitcases, not work ones. Draymond wrapped his arm around Kenyatta's waist naturally, with an intimacy he would never have had with a simple friend. Both looked down toward the zone of the patrol cars, with a mixture of hate and desperation in their eyes, as if someone had ruined a carefully laid plan. In that instant, Zaire's world crumbled. The tears began to flow again, no longer from fear, but from a piercing pain deep in her chest. There, in front of her eyes, a double betrayal was reflected. The man she loved and the friend she trusted had conspired together to eliminate her. The supposed business trip was a lie, and the forgotten wallet hadn't been an oversight, but a lure to force her to leave the house alone at midnight and bring her right to that spot where the hitman was waiting. Booker let her cry for a while in silence until her sobs transformed into ragged breaths. Then he started the car again and drove away from the airport, that stage where a part of Zaire had died forever. As they merged back onto the highway, Booker asked her to open Draymond's wallet again. Zaire obeyed with hands still trembling. The ID and cards were still there. Upon taking out the cash, she noticed something strange between the bills. A paper folded with great care. It wasn't a simple receipt, but a one-way plane ticket abroad in the names of Draymond and Kenyatta. Behind the ticket, another paper was even more disturbing. A recent life insurance policy in Zaire's name for an amount equivalent to hundreds of thousands of dollars, with Draymond as the sole beneficiary. Suddenly everything clicked. He didn't need that wallet because he already carried the passport and the tickets that really mattered in his pocket. He had left the wallet on purpose to force her to go to the airport. If the kidnapping went well, they would murder her, her body would disappear, and Draymond could report her missing to later collect the insurance and live like a king with Kenyatta in another country. Zaire squeezed the documents with rage, but alongside the horror, something new began to be born inside her. The blind love she had held for Draymond over those 3 years was pulverized in a matter of seconds, giving way to a cold, sharp fury very different from the desperate crying. She looked at herself in the vanity mirror of the car and barely recognized the woman she saw. She was no longer the meek and trusting wife of that morning. Booker, seeing that change in her eyes through the mirror, understood that Zaire was ready to go from victim to strategist. He told her that Draymond didn't know she had discovered everything. From her husband's point of view, the only thing that had happened was that the kidnapping had failed due to an unforeseen police operation. That ignorance of Draymond's was Zaire's greatest advantage. He still believed she was naive, oblivious to any suspicion. Booker recommended she return home and pretend nothing had happened, that she had never gone to the airport. They needed time to prepare a response, protect Zaire's assets, and gather evidence. The old version of her, the blind and compliant woman, was buried that night in the airport parking lot. A new Zaire surfaced, willing to exact revenge with patience and precision. Booker's black sedan advanced slowly, as if crossing a bridge between two worlds, that of naivety and that of lucidity. Inside the car, the silence returned, but it was no longer the discomfort of before, but a dense calm charged with pain and determination. Zaire kept hugging her purse as if it were a life vest in the middle of the storm that had devastated her life in less than an hour. Her tears had dried, leaving a rough sting on her skin. She watched the highway illuminated by a sad yellow light, while her mind went over everything she had seen and heard again and again. Booker, with a serene and fatherly voice, considered it was the moment to give her context. He confessed that he had been observing Draymond's movements with concern for 6 months. Through old contacts in the police and private security, he had found out that a well-known young businessman had gotten into debt with illegal online gambling for a huge sum, exceeding $200,000. That businessman was Draymond. At first, Booker didn't want to believe it, but the evidence piled up. There were reports about pawning small properties, discreetly, without notifying Zaire. Draymond's behavior had become more hermetic, more nervous. Zaire remembered with a knot in her throat all the times he had complained about blocked projects or delinquent clients to justify needing to sign urgent documents with her and withdraw money from the joint account. Now she understood that it wasn't the business devouring that money, but the gambling. She felt clumsily guilty, as if she had failed her father's legacy, who had left her the company and properties to care for. She had allowed a wolf in sheep's clothing to sleep beside her every night, devouring her future little by little. Booker then asked her to check the wallet again with more attention. Zaire slid her fingers through a compartment so narrow it was barely noticeable behind the card slots. There, she found a very folded paper, a power of attorney transferring the title of the main house and a valuable estate in the center of the city from her name to Draymond's. The signature that appeared at the bottom was Zaire's, or at least it looked like it. She knew immediately she had never signed that document. Booker explained that Draymond had probably forged her signature or slipped that paper in among other documents when she was tired or distracted. The plan was so meticulous, it was scary. If the kidnapping succeeded and Zaire disappeared, Draymond would use that power of attorney immediately before the news went public and legally keep everything. Zaire crumpled the paper with rage. Not an ounce of affection remained in her chest. She remembered Draymond's sweet smile when saying goodbye that night, thinking that in a few hours she would be dead. She swore to herself she would not let herself be fooled like that again. She looked at her own reflection in the car window and decided that the weak woman she had been until then ended there. In honor of her father's memory and out of respect for herself, she would not allow Draymond and Kenyatta to win even one more inch. Booker, seeing that resolve, began to outline a plan. The first thing was to return home before Draymond returned frustrated from the airport. The official story had to be very simple. Zaire had found the wallet at home in a plausible place so that Draymond believed she had not set foot outside. The ride back seemed shorter than the ride there. The streets of Atlanta were almost empty at 2 a.m, a perfect setting for Zaire to order her thoughts. She wiped away the remnants of tears, fixed her hijab in the small mirror, and practiced a smile. At first, the gesture looked hard and artificial, but by trying repeatedly, she managed to recover the sweet expression Draymond knew. She would have to become the best actress of her own life, not in search of an award, but to save her destiny. Upon arriving at the gated community, Booker turned off the car lights so as not to attract the attention of the guard or the neighbors. He dropped her off a few yards before the door so the sound of the engine wouldn't give anything away. Before Zaire got out, Booker handed her a small device the size of a button. It was a high-tech spy microphone. He asked her to hide it in a place Draymond used daily to talk or work, but where it wouldn't be easy to detect. Zaire clenched it in her fist with determination. She got out of the car and slipped to the door of her own house as if she were an intruder in enemy territory. She opened the lock with extreme care so it wouldn't creak. The interior was dark and silent, impregnated with the scent of lavender air freshener that other nights had comforted her and now felt suffocating. Every corner reminded her of scenes from a life that had just proven to be a lie. The sofa where they watched movies, the table where they had breakfast together, everything suddenly seemed like a theater set. She locked up again from the inside so nothing would draw attention when Draymond returned. Her first stop was the bathroom. She washed her face repeatedly with cold water, trying to erase the trace of tears and panic from her features. She looked at herself for a long time in the sink mirror. She kept seeing the same woman as always, but with another soul in her eyes. There was no longer naivety, but a new, lucid hardness. She whispered to herself that she could do it, that she wasn't a helpless victim, but the daughter of a strong man who never gave up. When she felt serene enough, she began to set the stage. Zaire took Draymond's wallet to the living room and meditated on where it would be most logical to find it. It shouldn't be hidden in an impossible place, but not so visible that it looked placed on purpose. After a few seconds of reflection, she decided to leave it half wedged in the crack between the sofa cushion and the armrest, just as it could have fallen from Draymond's pocket when he sat down for the last time to put on his shoes. The spot was perfect. Then she sat on that same sofa, turned on the television with the volume very low, left a magazine in her hands, and settled in as if she were reading until she fell asleep. The clock struck 3 when she heard a car engine approach and stop in front of the house. She forced herself to close her eyes and breathe slowly and regularly, mimicking sleep. She heard the key turn brusquely in the lock and the door burst open. Draymond entered panting with his tie loose, his face sweaty, and his expression altered. It wasn't, however, the sweat of someone returning exhausted from traffic, but of someone who has seen a criminal plan sink before his eyes. He called out Zaire's name loudly. She pretended to be startled, let the magazine fall, and sat up with an exaggerated yawn. She blinked several times, as if she were disoriented, and asked what he was doing there if he wasn't supposed to be on the plane by now. Her performance was impeccable. Draymond stood paralyzed for a second, seeing her so calm on the sofa. Then he recovered his composure and began to deploy his usual lies. With a sorrowful voice, he said that when he was on the highway to the airport, he realized he had lost his wallet. He panicked, he explained, and decided to return because he couldn't fly without ID. He added that there had been a truck accident and traffic collapsed, thus justifying why he arrived so late. Zaire listened to him with a worried face, nodding, although inside her blood was boiling. She knew perfectly well where he had actually been and with whom. She stood up, took him by the arm with sweetness, and commented that she had also been scared because she hadn't been able to communicate with him. With much naturalness, she pointed to the sofa. She told him that upon waking up, she had noticed something hard in the seat crack, and that upon looking she had seen the wallet peeking out. Following the direction she pointed with his hand, Draymond saw the edge of the leather sticking out between the cushions. His features changed immediately, first immense relief, then bewilderment. He threw himself at the wallet and checked its contents rapidly. Everything was there. What he didn't know was that Zaire had already photographed the ticket and the policy in Booker's car to preserve evidence. Draymond hugged her with enthusiasm, showered her with thanks, and called her his good luck charm. In that hug, Zaire caught something else. A feminine perfume that wasn't hers, a soft and expensive scent she recognized instantly as Kenyatta's. Her stomach turned, but she didn't pull away. She whispered for him to go take a hot shower and rest, because undoubtedly the traffic jam would have been exhausting. Draymond accepted the advice and went up the stairs toward the master bedroom. As soon as he disappeared from her sight, Zaire remembered the small microphone she was still squeezing in her hand. It was the perfect moment. Pretending she was going to prepare a clean towel, she went up after him. She heard the water running in the bathroom. There was no time to lose. Draymond's suit was thrown on the bed, but Zaire had a more practical thought. The suit could change every day. They needed an object that went with him always. Her eyes stopped on the leather briefcase he adored, a gift from her for his birthday that he never left behind. She opened a small interior pocket of the briefcase, normally destined for coins or keys, and placed the microphone in the deepest corner, pressing it with her finger to ensure it remained well fixed and hidden. She closed the zipper just as the bathroom door opened. Draymond came out with only a towel around his waist. Zaire turned with a tender smile and handed him the clean clothes she had prepared, as helpful as always. He kissed her on the forehead without imagining that from that moment, every important conversation he had with that briefcase nearby would be recorded. That night they slept in the same bed, but with their souls on opposite poles. Draymond fell into a deep sleep, convinced his failed plan had passed without leaving a trace, and perhaps planning a new strategy with Kenyatta. Zaire, on the other hand, remained awake, staring at the ceiling of the room. She was wearing discreet earphones connected to the spy microphone app on her mobile. She knew a man like Draymond wouldn't take long to contact his accomplice. Just before dawn, she pretended to get up to drink water and went to the kitchen with the phone in her hand. In the app, she saw that the device was active and picking up sound inside the briefcase. She heard the noise of traffic and then the ringtone of another line. Draymond was using a burner phone hidden in the briefcase to call someone. As soon as a female voice answered on the other end, Zaire felt a chill. It was Kenyatta. The conversation that followed was anything but romantic. There were no sweet words, but insults, reproaches, and panic. Draymond cursed the police and the operation that had ruined his plan at the airport. He shouted that the deadline to pay his gambling debts ended the next day, and that he owed more than $200,000. If he didn't pay, the thugs working for the loan shark would come to his house and office, ruining his reputation and perhaps sending him to jail. Kenyatta, as nervous as he was, but more calculating, reminded him of the alternative plan, the old warehouse inherited from Zaire's father, where they believed gold bars and deeds to land not yet titled were kept. The problem was the same as always. Only Zaire knew the code to the safe that, according to rumors, was there. Kenyatta insisted that Draymond must get the combination in any way, deceiving, pressuring, or taking advantage of some weakness. He accepted the idea and said that this very afternoon he would go home loaded with gifts to soften her up. Hearing all that was the final push Zaire needed. She hung up and, without wasting time, called Booker. Half an hour later, the black sedan was in front of her door again. Zaire got into the car with a backpack in which she carried important documents she had taken from a small safe in her bedroom. She was pale, but her eyes burned with a mixture of pain and firmness. She told Booker every detail of the call. He listened in silence and then told her the first step was to protect her money and assets before Draymond made any desperate move. Together, they headed to the bank and her father's trusted attorney. At the bank, Zaire transferred most of the money from the joint account to a new account in her name and blocked the additional cards Draymond used, claiming the wallet had been lost and she needed to cancel them for security. At the attorney's office, she signed an asset protection document that would make it enormously difficult for any attempt to dispose of her properties without her presence. Booker stood by her side, acting like a surrogate father, accompanying her in every procedure. By noon, Zaire felt a little stronger. She had just closed at least one of the main avenues by which Draymond sustained himself financially. That same afternoon, Draymond made good on his threat. He arrived home early with a huge bouquet of red roses and a small pharmacy package. Zaire received him with a surprisingly convincing smile, appearing flattered by the gesture. He handed her the flowers, kissed her on the cheek, and gave her the package, explaining that it was a supplement of imported vitamins, very expensive, that he had bought just for her because he had seen her looking tired and pale lately. "I worry about your health," he said with his best attentive husband voice. Zaire held the bottle in her hands, feeling a tingle of alarm. When Draymond went to the bathroom to freshen up, she opened it with caution. The seal looked tampered with and poorly reglued. She emptied a capsule into her palm. Its appearance didn't match that of ordinary vitamins and had a delicate white powder on the surface. During dinner, Draymond insisted several times that she take a capsule in front of him. He watched her with a scary intensity, as if expecting an immediate effect. Zaire, with cunning, got up from the table saying she was going to get a glass of water. In the kitchen, she threw the capsule down the sink drain and popped a mint candy of similar size into her mouth. She returned to the table, placed it on her tongue, and swallowed it in front of Draymond's eyes. He smiled satisfied, believing he had taken the first step to poisoning her little by little. In the following days, Zaire kept getting rid of the contents of the bottle in the toilet, leaving only the empty container so it looked like she was taking it with discipline. The secret war had begun, and any slip-up could cost her life. 3 days after that poisoning attempt, Draymond was starting to unravel. He expected to see Zaire get sick, show signs of dizziness or weakness that would facilitate his plans, but what he saw was quite the opposite. She got up early, did stretches in the garden, cooked healthy meals, smiled, and sent him off with kind words. This made him even more nervous, while the gambling creditors kept harassing his phone with increasingly explicit threats. Zaire, seeing that the pressure on him was increasing, decided the moment had come to move to psychological counterattack. She had to push him to make mistakes that would incriminate him even more. She called him at the office mid-morning with a cheerful tone. She told him she had been reflecting and wanted to celebrate that he was calmer after the scare of the lost wallet, and also thank him for how hard he worked. She planned to organize a special dinner at home. As the cherry on top, she confessed she missed her best friend Kenyatta, whom she hadn't seen in a while, and asked if he thought it was a good idea to invite her too. On the other end of the line, there was a brief silence. Draymond must have debated between the risk and the opportunity. Having his mistress and his wife under the same roof was dangerous, but it could also serve to manipulate both of them together. Finally, he accepted with feigned enthusiasm, without suspecting he had just walked straight into the trap. That night, Zaire dressed the table with almost ceremonial care. She lit scented candles, brought out the finest china, and placed plates of select meat and carefully prepared sides in the center. She wore a modest burgundy dress, elegant and sober, and had applied just enough makeup to highlight features that were now firmer. At 8 o'clock sharp, the doorbell rang. Draymond opened the door for Kenyatta, who appeared in a tight dress that marked every curve, creating a clear difference with Zaire's discretion. She smiled and brought a gift in her hand. She greeted Zaire with kisses on both cheeks, with that false affection she had always used, and Zaire returned the hug, feeling like she was hugging a snake. Dinner began with light jokes and trivial comments. Draymond and Kenyatta shot glances loaded with messages that Zaire pretended not to notice. She concentrated on serving, refilling glasses, and maintaining the apparently cordial atmosphere. Amid the clinking of silverware, Zaire decided to move the pieces. She slowly laid her knife and fork on the plate, wiped her lips with the napkin, and with a lower voice said that the night before she had had a very strange dream. Draymond, with his mouth full, asked what she had dreamed. Zaire smiled with an enigmatic air. She recounted that in the dream there was a rich woman with a charming husband and a very close friend, but secretly that husband and friend were conspiring to murder her for her inheritance. The details she added were so precise they turned blood to ice. She spoke of a fake work trip, of a hitman with chloroform at the door of an airport, of adulterated vitamins. Kenyatta's face lost all color. Her fork slipped from her hand and clattered against the plate. Draymond choked on a piece of meat and started coughing desperately, drinking water in large gulps. The air in the room became thick. The two looked at each other sideways, trying to guess how much Zaire knew. She, after a calculated pause, let out a light laugh and said that luckily it had only been a dream because it was impossible for a husband as loving as Draymond and a friend as good as Kenyatta to do something so monstrous. Her words, soft in form, cut like a scalpel. Before they could regain control, Zaire launched the final strike. She said that dream had made her think a lot about death and that, driven by a kind of spiritual enlightenment, she had gone that very day to the attorney. She commented with a serene gesture that she had completely modified her will. She explained that if she died suddenly or in dubious circumstances before the age of 60, 100% of her assets, including the house, the land, the bank accounts, the stocks, and the contents of the family safe, would be donated automatically to a foundation for orphanages and a cancer charity. Neither her husband nor any other relative would receive a single dollar. She justified her decision by saying Draymond was a capable man who could earn a living by himself without depending on an inheritance. The room was plunged into a brutal silence. Draymond went rigid, staring into space, as if someone had yanked the floor from under his feet. Kenyatta opened her mouth, but found no words. All the effort to eliminate Zaire and keep her money had been neutralized in an instant. Killing her no longer made sense. If she died, they would have nothing to inherit beyond their own debts. Zaire looked at them, tilted her head, and with a sweetly poisonous smile, asked if they saw anything wrong with her decision, if perhaps it wasn't worthy to destine it all to charity. Draymond stammered that it was an exaggerated reaction, and that she had to think about the family's future. Zaire interrupted him with firm politeness, insisting she was doing it precisely thinking of her spiritual future. She finished her piece of meat as if nothing had happened, while across from her, two greedy souls fell apart in silent desperation. What neither of them knew was that in a corner of the dining room, A small light from a hidden camera installed by Booker blinked, recording every gesture, every look of panic. That dinner was the first piece of a dossier of evidence that would completely dismantle Draymond and Kenyatta's version in court. That same night, unable to sleep, Draymond and Kenyatta took refuge in the small apartment she had in another part of the city, their secret hideout, which had now become a panic shelter. Draymond's phone wouldn't stop vibrating with calls and messages from foreign numbers loaded with threats and nasty photos. The bookies weren't going to wait any longer. Draymond paced from one side to the other, disheveled, haggard, increasingly on the verge of collapse. He knew that with the new will, killing Zaire would be useless. Getting the inheritance the fast way was ruled out. Kenyatta, smoking nervously on the sofa, blamed him for everything. She threw the responsibility on him for not having controlled his wife and for having allowed her to change the will. They argued, shouting with increasingly cruel insults. However, the more the clock advanced, the clearer they saw they needed money immediately. If they couldn't eliminate Zaire, they only had the option to break her. Draymond decided to give a new twist to the violence. He would plot a domestic kidnapping. He would hire 3 thugs to enter the house, tie Zaire up, and torture her physically and psychologically until, weakened, she signed a revocation of the will and several powers of attorney for the transfer of assets. He was no longer interested in pretending to be the perfect husband. His life was at stake and the mask was falling off. The next day, Draymond didn't return home. He sent a text saying an urgent audit had come up at the company and he would have to stay and sleep there. In reality, he met with 3 burly criminals in a coffee shop on the outskirts of the city. He promised them a good payout if they managed to get the necessary signatures out of Zaire. When the sun began to set and the sky dyed orange, Draymond, Kenyatta, and the thugs got into a van with tinted windows heading for Zaire's house. From outside, the residence was silent. There were no lights on in the entrance. Something strange, because Zaire usually turned on the porch light before dusk. Her car was still in the garage, which meant in theory she was inside. Draymond opened the gate with a spare key and walked with his heart racing. He signaled the thugs to get ready. He put the key in the lock of the main door and turned it carefully. The door opened without resistance. They entered like a wave onto the ground floor, prepared to subdue whoever they found. The thugs checked the living room, the kitchen, and the guest rooms. Draymond and Kenyatta ran up to the master bedroom, where Zaire usually rested when she was home. Draymond kicked the door open and shouted her name with a threatening tone. The room was empty, the bed impeccably made, the closet intact. He started checking the bathroom, the study, every corner of the upper floor. Nothing. The house seemed abandoned. Terrified by the possibility that Zaire had managed to escape, Draymond went back down to the living room. The thugs confirmed there was nobody in the entire house. In a fit of rage, he kicked a glass coffee table, breaking a vase to pieces. Then, a soft sound broke the silence. A laptop turned on sitting on the center table had emitted a notification, and the screen lit up suddenly. Draymond, Kenyatta, and the thugs approached with suspicion. On the screen, an incoming video call began to play automatically. Zaire's face appeared with clarity. She was sitting in an unknown room wearing a black hijab and a serene, almost cold expression. Draymond leaned toward the screen and shouted, demanding to know where she was and ordering her to come home. Zaire didn't flinch. She greeted Draymond, Kenyatta, and without hesitating greeted the guests they had brought too, demonstrating she knew perfectly well he wasn't alone. Then she pointed with her finger to a small mark in the corner of the screen, the live stream icon, and a viewer counter that wouldn't stop rising. She explained to them that hidden cameras placed throughout the house were broadcasting in real time to a private server accessed by her lawyer and certain police contacts. If she pressed a button on her mobile, all the content and the location would be sent immediately to the authorities. Draymond went pale. Zaire hadn't alerted the police yet. She was giving them one last chance to listen to her. Calmly, she told them she knew they had come for her money, and she knew Draymond was being hounded for his gambling debts. She acknowledged she was aware of the urgency, but added she didn't intend to help him in the way he wanted. Still, She assured she wasn't so cruel as to let them kill him for a default. She confessed that the will really existed, just as she had told them, and that the main assets were already shielded. But she also revealed she had liquid capital not registered in the will, a legacy from her father in the form of cash and gold kept in a secret place sufficient to cover the debt and then some. Draymond and Kenyatta's eyes shone with greed. They asked where that money was, promising to disappear forever from Zaire's life once they had it. She described an old textile warehouse owned by her family in an abandoned industrial zone, a place almost nobody visited. She recounted that in the back, under the concrete floor, where machine number 7 used to stand, there was a buried safe. She gave them the combination based on their wedding date reversed. It was a story so detailed and plausible that it dissipated Draymond's last reservations. He remembered that warehouse. He had been there once at the start of the marriage and knew it was perfect for hiding something. Without thinking any more, Draymond ordered the thugs to accompany him to the warehouse. He needed their strength to break the floor and carry the box. He slammed the laptop shut, cutting the call, convinced fortune was within reach. The van started up and shot out toward the industrial zone with Kenyatta indicating the fastest routes on her phone. None of them noticed the car following at a distance. Booker's sedan, with him at the wheel and Zaire by his side, observing the red dot on the GPS marking the location of Draymond's vehicle. After 45 minutes on increasingly deteriorated roads, they arrived at the avenue where old, rusted warehouses lined up. The warehouse of Zaire's family stood at the end with the facade peeling and a fence defeated by rust. Draymond rammed the fence with the van until he ripped the chain off. They entered the patio, covered in dry mud and weeds, gathered shovels, picks, and a crowbar from the trunk, and forced the warehouse door, which opened with a sharp squeak. A smell of dust, humidity, and animal droppings hit their noses. Only the light of the flashlight Kenyatta held broke the darkness. Guided by Zaire's instructions, they advanced to the back, where an old metal machine covered in rust stood, having been stopped for years. Draymond pointed to the cement floor under the machine and ordered the thugs to start hitting the surface with the crowbar and sledgehammers. The metallic din echoed throughout the building. For almost an hour they worked without rest, cracking the concrete and moving chunks aside until one of the shovels hit something solid. Draymond ordered them to stop and brought the flashlight closer. Under a layer of dirt appeared the top of a medium-sized metal safe. Between sweats and gasps, they lifted the box and placed it on the cracked floor. Draymond wiped his hands as best he could, approached the combination lock, and started turning the wheel with trembling fingers, following the numbers Zaire had given him. A soft click was heard. The lock gave way. Kenyatta rushed to stand next to him, holding her breath. The thugs also approached, trying to see the interior. Draymond opened the box suddenly, expecting a rain of golden shine. Inside, there were no bars or wads of dollars, only piles of papers, old folders, and several large photographs. Confused, Draymond began to rummage nervously, hoping to find the bills under that mess. What he found were copies of his gambling debt documents with all the transaction data. There were also receipts of money transfers from Zaire's account to his and to Kenyatta's over the last 2 years. And as if that weren't enough, the photos showed Draymond and Kenyatta entering hotels, dining together, and hugging at the airport. On top of everything, a white envelope with perfectly recognizable handwriting, Zaire's. On the cover it said, "A gift for the traitors." Draymond opened the envelope with shaking hands. On the sheet, barely a sentence. "The treasure you seek is not here. What is in this box is the evidence of everything you have done. Enjoy it. The police are on the way." Just then, a powerful beam of light flooded the interior of the warehouse through the broken windows and the cracks in the door. Police sirens began to wail a few yards away. Several loudspeakers shouted clear orders indicating the building was surrounded and nobody should move. Draymond let the paper fall, feeling his legs go weak. Kenyatta started screaming and hitting him in the chest, calling him an idiot. The thugs tried to flee toward a back exit, but the door flew inward under the ram of a SWAT team. In a matter of minutes, everyone was pinned against